I don't know about y'all, but I think I need a Friday afternoon therapy session after the week that the space community has just had. And there is nobody better, no one that I wanted to have this therapy session with more than you, Eric Berger of Ars Technica. Eric, wow, what a week, what a 24 hours. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Because you were kind of caught up in this whole feud between Elon Musk and Donald Trump yesterday.
It's been really an insane week because it was just last Friday that the final budget request from the president dropped. Now, we kind of knew what was in it based upon the skinny budget and other reporting that we'd done. But, it still came out. I was trying to have my daughter's high school graduation party Friday night. So I was completely out of the loop and getting text messages about this was in the
Oh
budget, this
man.
wasn't. And then, like, the next day, started hearing that Jared Isaacman was not going to be NASA administrator now, and had been his nomination had been pulled for political reasons. And then we roll into this week, and all kinds of pretty wild things are happening on a number of different fronts. And then, yeah, of course, yesterday the Trump Musk bromance completely blows up, and there are threats to take away government contracts for SpaceX. Elon says we're going to decommission Dragon. We're not going to decommission Dragon, and yeah, so here we are.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to do here. I don't know if talking about it is going to make me feel better about everything that's happened or if it's going to make me feel worse. But I know we need to talk about it. We all kind of knew that this relationship between Elon Musk and Donald Trump had the potential to blow up pretty explosively. And I was a White House correspondent for 4 years in the first Trump administration. I should not be surprised by anything, and yet I was still surprised by what happened yesterday and how quickly it escalated. Were you surprised?
It's funny. I was having a discussion yesterday with a friend of mine in the space industry, and he said, I thought I was to the point where I was inured to being surprised by things that Elon tweeted, and then yesterday happened. So, I think the way I'm looking at this is the base case for me, the most likely outcome is that not much changes, right, with regard to SpaceX and its relationship with NASA and the federal government and contracts. This could well be a tempest in the teapot. Trump and Musk were clearly already going their separate ways, but at the end of the day, NASA needs SpaceX. SpaceX, to some extent, although certainly not as much as they used to, needs NASA. And so that relationship is going to continue. And certainly the Department of Defense needs SpaceX and its launch capability and its Starshield program. But I do think there's a non-zero chance that things really did blow up yesterday, and it could be a marked change. And Trump could very well tell the FAA to slow down its approval of Starship launches, and they could just completely go to an Artemis program that cuts out the moon. They could deprecate future SpaceX contracts, and there really could be a separation going forward between NASA and SpaceX. It's too early, I think, to say where that's going to go. It's hard to know how much of yesterday was showmanship and sort of heat of the moment anger versus
Right.
underlying permanent changes. But it's obviously a really fascinating and a bit intimidating time to be interested in space in the United States.
Let's kind of dig into the Dragon International Space Station because that's when things really took a turn yesterday. And that's also when you kind of entered the conversation with your post on X. And for those that missed it, I'm just going to read it. You responded to one of my old colleagues, Caitlin Collins at CNN, and said this would both end the International Space Station and simultaneously provide no way to safely deorbit it. And you were referring to Trump's threat to revoke all of SpaceX's government contracts. And then Elon responded to you and said, this just gets better and better. Go ahead, make my day. How are your notifications after that?
Well, Elon and I have interacted on Twitter a
Right.
fair bit before. Nothing super surprising about that, in terms of my notifications and things like that. But it was interesting that he seized upon that, as I think he sort of understands that Dragon is really the key to the International Space Station now, and so that's a lever that he could pull in his relationship with the federal government that would really have NASA kind of over a barrel. And it's true. Dragon is the only way NASA has to get its astronauts to the space station. Now they can send one or two people up on Soyuz missions like they did in the past, but Russia's reducing its Soyuz activity, not increasing it.
Mhm.
Um, and Dragon right now,
Starliner.
Starliner is at least 18 months away from an operational flight, probably longer. So that's not really an option. And there are two cargo providers at the space station. There's Cygnus and Dragon that send supplies and food and all that up. But the most recent Cygnus mission had to be scrapped because the spacecraft was damaged on the way to the launch site. So again, Dragon and the Falcon 9 rocket. Oh, by the way, and the only way Cygnus gets to space station right now is on Falcon 9. That's its launch vehicle because Northrop Grumman's rocket was dependent upon Russian engines and Ukrainian manufacturing, and then it had to be. They don't have any more of those left. So, I mean, literally, NASA's path to the space station rides on a Falcon 9 rocket in a Dragon spacecraft. So that is the end of the space station, most likely. And last year NASA gave SpaceX a contract to deorbit the vehicle. So basically, this is to make a powered descent
Mhm.
of this massive laboratory in orbit that's 400 metric tons, by far the largest human-made object ever in space. And so we don't really want to land that, you know, on the land. You want to deorbit in Point Nemo in the Pacific Ocean. So SpaceX got a contract from NASA to basically modify a Dragon spacecraft to power deorbit in 2030 to where we want it to go.
I mean, if you're a NASA astronaut at the Johnson Space Center right now, watching all this play out, every seat to the International Space Station is, the stuff of dreams since you were a kid for many of them. And to see this kind of all playing out so publicly, Elon saying, I'm getting rid of Dragon. And then a few minutes later, or a few hours later, somebody with about 100 followers at the time says, hey, why don't you guys get along, let cooler heads prevail? And then Elon's like, oh, yeah, no, like, all right, like, take it back. We'll let Dragon live another day. Just the back and forth, the emotional whiplash for not just the astronauts, but everybody that has a stake in this it's hard to wrap your mind around all the different ways that this potential feud, or not potential feud, that this potential war between the president of the United States and literally the most powerful person in the global space industry, all the ripple effects that this could have.
Yeah, it's a couple of thoughts on that, Kristen. First of all, I would say that effectively shit posting by the president of the United States and the world's richest person um, was a spectacle to behold, and certainly very entertaining from a meme standpoint. But there are very real consequences and very real human emotions at play here. I mean, just you mentioned astronauts. Take the case of Zena Cardman. She was bumped off the NASA or the SpaceX
Mm.
mission last year. She was commander. She was bumped off so that they could have two seats for Butch and Sonny to come home, and she's now scheduled to fly on a future Dragon spacecraft. So, like, she's got to be wondering, am I ever going to space? Um, and the other thing is that this is just fundamentally bad for the country. The reality is, whether people who dislike Elon Musk, and there are many, and many of them are readers of my website, SpaceX is integral to the success of NASA. Not just for the space station, but they're building the most complex part for the Artemis program. And for really Artemis to be sustainable, Starship has to work well. Otherwise, it's probably just another flags and footprints initiative. If there is some kind of breaking between NASA and SpaceX, in my mind, it seems pretty clear that the United States will just cede space superiority to China in terms of exploration. China is already rising, and much of the innovation we've seen in spaceflight over the last 10 or 15 years has come from SpaceX and in all of the different things that it's done. And so if we are sort of at a point where there's a fork in the road and NASA kind of licks its wounds and with a lower budget and is trying to do things with other contractors and SpaceX is off, like we're going our own direction, I think that's a real problem for this country.
You think it would allow China to beat the the United States back to the moon in
I
terms
don't
of.
think there's any doubt about it. I mean, great for Blue Origin. I'm hearing that they're making pretty good progress with their lunar lander, but it's very difficult for me to see them having a human capable lander ready for the moon before at least 7 or 10 years.
Well, and I think that's really what's at stake here, right? If you zoom out and look at this from a geopolitical perspective, this war between Elon Musk and Donald Trump has the potential to allow China to beat the United States back to the moon.
Yeah.
Astronaut boots on the moon,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think the calculation for Trump, to the extent there is one, is that he probably has been told accurately, I think, that China is not going to land astronauts on the moon during his term, right? Because he will be out of office most likely January 2029. Also, for political reasons, he got rid of his NASA administrator, right, Jared Isaacman, who
Mm-hmm.
was, most people agree, certainly in the space community, that he would have been a potentially transformative leader for NASA. Really was the right person for the right time, and because there was some pique against Elon in the White House personnel office, they just tossed him aside. Like, we don't need you anymore. And so now NASA is going to be without leadership for 3 more months. So I don't think that Trump is making decisions on space policy super concerned about the threat of China or anything else. I think it's more about kind of a zero-sum game in terms of a political fight, if that makes sense.
You brought up how the world is looking at this feud between Trump and Elon, and I came across this post on X from Dmitry Rogozin, the former head of Russia's space agency. I don't know if you saw this because there's been so much happening. It's hard to keep up with everything,
No,
and
I didn't. What did he say?
worried we're gonna miss something as we're recording this. Okay, you got to hear this. Dmitry Rogozin, he says, trying to do like I'm laughing because like this is how I cope with things. People are always like, why are you smiling? This is such a serious topic. This is how I cope. Some people cry, I laugh. So forgive the smile. Dmitry Rogozin says, Elon Musk, don't be upset. You are respected in Russia. If you encounter insurmountable problems in the United States, come to us and become one of us. Here you will find reliable comrades and complete freedom of technical creativity. We will, of course, resolve issues of citizenship and military ID. Please fill out the forms at this link with respect to you. Okay, I'm glad to see that you're laughing too. But this is, Elon's not going to go to Russia. He's not going to defect to China. But the United States' adversaries, biggest adversaries in space, are seeing this as a huge opportunity.
Yeah, just to go back to Rogozin for a minute.
Okay,
He's the guy who a few years ago called me a war criminal on
That's right.
on Twitter. And also a couple of years ago, I think it was on CNN even, but he invited Elon Musk to come to Russia then.
Did that interview.
And he would leave the
I interviewed him.
Yeah, he would leave the tea kettle on for Elon Musk. And and I remember thinking at the time, don't go to Russia.
Right.
Because I certainly wouldn't drink the tea. So
but you know Elon, right?
Yeah,
Like you speak to him a lot. You interviewed him just a few weeks ago. Like, does that thought ever enter his mind?
No, so I would say this. You're absolutely correct that this is a huge opportunity for China. I don't think Russia is in a position to capitalize it from a space perspective. They're just really lowering their investment in space. They've got still mired in this awful war in Ukraine that they're trying to pay for, and they're taking actually talent, or had been taking talent from Roscosmos to put toward the war effort. It's certainly a huge opportunity for China. Do you remember Elon's speech in Guadalajara, Mexico, back in 2016, where he first unveiled Starship?
Mm-hmm.
So I remember having a discussion at the time with Lori Garver, who then had recently left NASA as deputy administrator, and we were sort of chatting through, well, this is all interesting, but the key question was how Elon was going to pay for it and whether the US government was really interested in going to Mars. And my thought at the time, where I sort of was chatting with Lori, is like, one option would be for him to basically move his enterprises to a country like the UAE, United Arab Emirates, because they have lots of money. They would strip away all of the regulatory issues that he needs to worry about. They could have an equatorial launch site. And basically he could do whatever he wanted there. And Lori completely dismissed it at the time, rightly so. But here we are, almost a decade later, and so I would not think Elon would go to Russia. I would not think he'd go to China. I don't think he's going to go anywhere, right? Because of ITAR and all of the legalities of that, and I mean, the real secret sauce of SpaceX is the talented engineers who work there. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure many of them want to move to the Middle East. And the other key to SpaceX's success is they're able to hire the best and brightest engineers coming out of grad school and undergraduate. They get them for a few years. The true believers stay. The people who get burned out move on, and they sort of keep bringing that in. That would be much more difficult to pull off in the UAE.
Yeah.
But it is, if he were going to go to somewhere, I would say more likely the Middle East, and certainly not Russia.
So potentially the UAE could be a winner here. China, a winner here. We talked about
I think a
Blue
big
Origin.
loser is Europe, because they, NASA in the United States government space has really treated them poorly over the last 10 or 15 years, canceled lots of contracts, and, with its Mars mission, ExoMars, things like that. And now, like, it's clearly the Lunar Gateway is a political football. The Space Launch System rocket is a political football. The Orion spacecraft, which Europe builds the service module of, is a political football. The Trump budget tries to cancel it. Ted Cruz came out just yesterday basically and said through these directives that he believes that Gateway and SLS and Orion should keep flying. And so, we have been a really unreliable partner for them. And they had, up until the Ukraine war, they had worked somewhat closely with Russia. But after that, they just completely pulled away. And so they focused more on the United States. And now here we're kind of kicking them some more. So I think that, and they cannot be happy, right, that their astronauts are getting to space on Dragon, on Elon Musk's vehicles, while he's meddling in their politics.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just, I on one hand, you saw Thierry Breton, a former European Union commissioner, sort of celebrating the feud yesterday. But this all bodes poorly, I think, for partnerships between NASA and ESA going.
Yeah. I mean, for people who have been following this, everybody knows how powerful Elon and his companies are, how much the US government needs them, both in civil space and in military space in terms of NatSec launches and whatnot. But it takes a moment like this, I think, for everybody to kind of wake up and pay attention. And people in Europe have been sounding the alarm about this for a while. People in Washington have been too, saying, we want to diversify our launch opportunities, our launch providers. But the problem is, as you know, nobody's been able to keep up with SpaceX. I mean, nobody's been able to do what SpaceX can do. So we talked about some of the winners and losers, but another potential winner here is ULA and also Blue Origin, right?
Oh, I think there's some Schadenfreude in both ULA and Blue Origin. I don't think ULA is in a position to really capitalize. I think from a funding standpoint, they're pretty
Yeah.
constrained. Um, and and my outlook on them isn't great. Blue Origin does have a chance. Um, you
Especially
know,
with Blue Moon, right?
well, so the Blue Origin is a complicated story. And actually, I'm working on something right now about sort of ongoing delays with the New Glenn rocket. So, like, it's not hunky dory over at Blue Origin, right? They've had rifts. They're in the middle of a pretty difficult culture shift from kind of more traditional laid back aerospace company to stack ranking and Amazon type leadership, that has really shook up the workforce. But in answer to your question, I do think Jeff Bezos is very happy probably about what's happening. Clearly, Elon Musk got the jump on him in terms of being a tech bro cozying up to Trump,
Yeah.
and Bezos missed out and tried to sort of crawl some of that back with donations for the inauguration. He and Lauren Sanchez were at the inauguration, and has been trying to play nice with Trump. But yes, if the Trump Musk romance completely blows up, then Jeff Bezos is there saying, "Look, I killed my paper's endorsement of you. We can build big rockets too. Let's screw Elon, basically." probably would be some of the messaging that he would be offering. Um, the question is whether Blue Origin really is in a position to fulfill what
Yeah.
SpaceX is doing, and I just don't see it. SpaceX has now launched the Falcon 9 rocket 500 times. And that's just an enormous achievement that I don't think people really fully appreciate, and it's really hard to scale that. Just to sort of give you another example, to go back to Europe, that they look at everyone looks at the Starlink internet constellation and goes, "Wow, that's an amazing capability," especially after the Ukraine war. So China's putting all these resources into it, and Europe obviously does not want to put its sovereign communications on Elon Musk constellation. So they, for a few years, they've been playing this Iris Squared constellation, basically Europe's answer to Starlink. And it initially was going to be like a few $1 billion in 2026 or 2027 when they started operational capability. Now it's like $10 billion in 2030. And then there's reports just this week that this is not going to be doable at all. And the people who are involved in it want to pull out. So like you've got the whole of Europe, right? Like dozens of countries, and they're all at this point, I think, in a state of throwing up their hands and saying, we can't do Starlink, even though like the blueprint is out there, right? Of
Yeah.
what SpaceX did.
Uh-huh.
So it's yeah, you're exactly right. Like it's one thing. There are opportunities for other companies and countries here, but they've got to execute like SpaceX has, and so far we've
Yeah.
seen limited evidence of that.
How are you feeling if you're Gwynne Shotwell right now, the CEO of SpaceX? Like, how does she navigate this?
It's a great question. Um, I'm sure she was probably mortified by the thought of decommissioning Dragon because of all the role it plays, and it does bring in a lot of federal funding to SpaceX. And I haven't talked to her about this, to be clear, but in important ways, she's simpatico with Elon. So if she feels like Elon and SpaceX is being done hard by the industry or by the government, I mean, and he wants to fight it, she's probably going to be right alongside him, helping him to fight that fight. She's very, she's very tough, and more in line with Elon willingness to take on the world than I think people may
Hmm.
realize.
You said a minute ago, if something like if this Trump Elon bromance blows up, it didn't it just blow up yesterday?
I just think we're at a point right now where we cannot see the future. Yesterday was so shocking and so surprising. I would be usually have a pretty good grasp of space policy and where things are headed, but in the last week, the presumptive nominee or the nominee to lead NASA for the last 6 months was literally thrown aside, like he was nothing, and now Trump is saying we're going to cancel SpaceX contracts. And so I think a lot of that yesterday was noise. And I do think there will be some attempts for rapprochement, at least to get to a detente type situation where there's a working relationship going forward. So yeah, I mean, the bromance is over, but like the relationship might not be completely blown up. But then again, it might. I mean, there are nuclear options that Trump could take easily that would absolutely screw Elon over. There's the regulatory angle. The NHTSA could go after Tesla and autopilot and safety. The FAA could go after SpaceX. FCC could go after Starlink. I mean, Trump has shown no qualms whatsoever about weaponizing the U.S. government to go after whoever he doesn't like at that moment. And so he could absolutely go after Elon and his companies and make things very, very uncomfortable. And Elon,
Even though the US government is so dependent on them, both NASA and DoD.
yeah, sure. And like I think the most effective way to really hurt Elon would not be to cancel government contracts, because SpaceX's revenue right now, the majority of it comes from Starlink, right? It's like SpaceX is not dependent on the U.S. government anymore. Now they certainly like government contracts and will fight for every U.S. dollar they can get from the feds, but the majority of the revenues at this point now, and certainly in the future, are going to come from Starlink. Um, so I think the way to really hurt Elon, and I'm not trying to give anyone tips here, but would be through the regulatory side of things, because
Yeah.
the U.S. government could play a huge role in that. Elon has a lot of money to fight against that, but the U.S. government has awesome powers in terms of what it can do and the financial wherewithal to sustain that.
Well, and that's such a big part of the reason why Elon got into politics to begin with, to improve the regulatory environment. And now that very thing could potentially be used against him. But I'm hoping, let's just take a deep breath. We're heading into the weekend. I do feel better after having talked to you, Eric, although we're ending on a bit of a darker note. Welfare check. Overall, how are you feeling in terms of the US space industry and the expansion of humanity into space? Are you still optimistic that this is all moving in the right direction?
I'd love to tell you a happy story, but I'll tell you, Kristin, this week has been really difficult. I think it's been a real body blow to NASA. Um, the fact is that I think Isaacman would have been an exceptional leader for the space agency, and he was really kind of the right person at the right time. If you listen to some of the
Yeah.
interviews given publicly, and I've had some discussions with him, and he clearly understands the problems that NASA faces and that the commercial space faces, and was going to work towards solutions while delivering meaningful progress toward human expansion into the solar system. I don't think the next guy or girl is going to do that for NASA. I think it'll be much more taking the marching orders from the White House, taking them down or up the avenue to Capitol Hill, and basically the Senate saying, no, we're doing the plan that exists. And it's just, I see policy quagmires. But if you want some hopeful side of things, there's like
Uh,
this.
I just want truth. I just want reality. I don't
Well,
need.
I
I
mean,
don't need hope.
the reality is that the commercial space industry is in a great place right now. There's all kinds of really interesting innovations happening. 'Cause I mean, a decade ago, so much of the activity was focused on launch. Well, we're moving beyond launch now into in-space propulsion, commercial satellites, better ways of getting data down from space, much more improved Earth observation. We're starting to see the beginnings of a lunar economy. So like there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening, but it could all blow up.
Well, do you have any nice weekend plans, Eric? Are you just hoping another, bomb doesn't drop over the weekend?
I'm hoping another bomb doesn't drop over the weekend. That would be my preference at this point.
Yeah, it's a first day of summer in my household. School's out, so this is all the timing of all this. It's never easy, right?
I'm hoping maybe Saturday to take my wife two-stepping and relax a little bit, but we'll see.
Nice. Well, I hope you get to do that. Eric, thank you again so much for just uh, for coming on The Endless Void, for sharing your thoughts, for being honest, and for, giving me a bit of a therapy session that I needed heading into this weekend. Just talking about it feels better.
Well, I really enjoyed it too. Thanks for the time.